Today we're going to have a look at steeple analysis. Last lesson we already started talking about it, and today we're going to jump deep inside to the topic and talk about each of the factors more specifically. So let's get going. Let's get started. The steeple analysis, we know that it's an acronym. It stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, and ethical factors that are affecting our business. We know that these are external factors, that these can be either positive or negative. So we either consider them as threats, so something that is going to negatively either affect the profit of the business, the growth, maybe cause some constraints for the business, or we can consider them or see them as opportunities. So something that the business can benefit from, maybe something that is opening up new markets or new trends that the business can build their future on. Okay, so let's jump into the first factor, social. Social and cultural factors basically are going to include anything that is connected to people, to the population, to the society. So some examples are listed here in the presentation. It can be the fact that the population is aging, that there are reduced birth rates, longer life expectancy, so things connected a little bit to geography. It can be the changing role of women, how they're increasingly seeking employment, that they get higher, maybe more responsible jobs in the industry, that they get, let's say, the same, or that the paying gap is decreasing, and that they get paid similarly to men. So even this is a social factor. We can even talk about education facilities, the fact that there's increasing literacy in some less developed countries, that workforce is slowly becoming more skilled and adaptable. We can talk about early retirement in high-income countries. We can talk about rising divorce rates. So really, as you can see, it's anything that is connected to the society, to the people, and some trends, like how they're used to living. So this can be also anything connected to lifestyle, the fact that people are, let's say, that it's becoming more trendy to, let's say, cycle to work, to be environmentally friendly. So even trends like that. The technological factor means that we are going to be changing, or that the external factor connected to technology is changing, and that is somehow going to affect our business. Now, what can we mean by technology? It can be anything that is the use of tools, machines, and even science in industry. So we're talking about advancement of human knowledge. We're talking about like some new vaccines, some new discoveries. It can be science, it can be in medicine, it can be pretty much everything that is somehow helping us move forward by using capital, so tools and machines. Now, information technology, if we are not familiar with what it is, how do we define IT? It's the use of electronic technology. Okay, so when we use electronic technology to either gather, store, process, or communicate information. So a lot of those technological improvements in the past few years are going to be connected to the electronic technology, to IT, to the use of these different electronic devices, and it has affected our life a lot, and it will even increasingly affect businesses and the population as well. Some examples of developments which have led businesses to adopt new strategies based on some technological changes is I don't know, For example, internet. Okay, internet for you guys seems like an old thing, but it wasn't for it's actually barely like quite new. And the idea is that once like a big technological improvement has happened, so internet has opened up a new market for businesses, and then they could change the way how they were looking at product development. They would produce new products, new services. Internet also helped improve stakeholder communication. It helped develop new and better processes. Also, you would have different cost benefits. So, for example, you could have long-term cost savings. You would gain as a business a competitive advantage, and it would also help the internet together with globalization. It helped with outsourcing and offshoring, which are two strategies that businesses often use. They're connected to HR. Outsourcing is when you are letting another business, a third-party business, do some of your work, so some of your core functions. For example, you can be outsourcing accounting. So an external company might be doing your accounting, or you might be outsourcing the HR part of finding new candidates and re-interviewing them. So this would be the job of HR agencies. Offshoring is also a great strategy. This is when you are taking a part of your business, for example, manufacturing, and you're placing it in a different country. So this is one way of how like businesses can be using um, the advantages of a different country, the fact that maybe they have lower wages there or cheaper resources there, and basically offshoring is just moving a part of my business to a different country to use these advantages. So technological changes are going to affect our business in these different ways, and it's up to us to figure out how a piece of technology, how some kind of invention, how this new, let's say, process or um, technology or machine, it can improve our business. So it's up for us to brainstorm whether it's going to be an opportunity for our business or a threat. Economic factors can result from three different, let's say, things or topics. You can have either changes in the trade cycle, so business cycle. We're going to talk about what that is more closely. You can have changes in government economic policies, and also countries, or so the country that we're operating in might become part of an economic union. So we are part of EU. We also have some free trade agreements with other countries which are not part of EU. So how is that going to benefit our country and the business environment or the economic environment that our business is operating in? Let's have a look at the first one. So changes in the trade cycle. First, we need to know what a trade cycle is. So we draw two lines. On the bottom, we're going to have time. So that's going to be one factor. On the top, we're going to have real GDP. Now, real GDP, what is it? GDP stands for gross domestic product, and it's a total value of output in a country's economy, measured in currency or unit. I'm sure you definitely heard about this from previous subjects. Try to Google how you say GDP in your own language. It's very similar. And what does it actually measure? So it measures the output of the country's economy. So how well the economy is doing, basically. And the trade cycle is showing us um, how the economy or is changing throughout time. So sometimes it's growing, as you can see here. There's some kind of peak, then there might be a fall, then you reach a trough, and we call these different stages with different names. Okay, so in these three, let's say that the first three parts, we might call this a boom, an economic boom. An economic boom is when your economy is really growing, so your GDP is rising over time. Everything's blooming. Businesses are growing. They have a lot like high profits. Everything is going well. Customers are buying your product, so on. Then until you reach a peak, that's when it seems like the economy cannot continue with this growth any longer. This is a peak, and usually after the peak comes a recession. So what governments are doing, they're actually trying never to reach the peak because they know that after the peak there's a recession there. So they're trying constantly to somehow boost the economy, help the economy, because they never want to see a fall in the real GDP. So recession, sometimes obviously the GDP is falling, but a recession, for us to be calling it a recession, we need to have the GDP declining or yes, falling for at least 6 months. That's how we define recession. So 2 quarters of falling GDP, or in other words, of negative growth, is going to be the definition of a recession. Now, what comes after recession? What if we're falling longer than that? Then comes a depression. So students who are studying history, we know about the Great Depression in the 30s, right? So depression is a decline in real GDP which is exceeding 10%. Yeah, or it's a recession lasting 2 or more years. So this one is going to be really, really long recession that the country, the economy is cannot get out of. So it is a decline which is super severe. Okay, so 10% is a lot, guys. Yeah, if it happens that the economy is declining by 10%, you're gonna feel it. And also a recession that is lasting 2 or more years, um, it's very hard to get back up from a depression already. So even when we have a recession going, governments are trying to do anything they can, different policies, fiscal, monetary, just so that they can put it back up again. Um, and this is overall, this is what we call a trade cycle, a business cycle. What as business students, you don't need to probably. I'm not sure if you need to be able to define depression. I think you might need to understand the terms. But I haven't seen an exam which is asking for the definition of depression. There was an exam which was very like closely related to recession, or the topic or the case study was about a business in recession or facing problems in recession. So I think as a business student, you really need to kind of just be able to understand what is happening to the business as it enters each of these phases in the economy. Um, just to somehow sum up or add or finish this topic, after we have a sort of like the lowest bottom, after we reach that, it's called either a trough or slump. Then comes the recovery, boom, and then it happens all over again. If we would somehow draw a line of best fit, so in the long term, in the very long term, you can see that the economy is growing. And this is why it makes sense if you're a young person around your 20s, 30s to invest into, let's say, into stock, to invest into stock of different companies, because even if throughout the 30, 40 years there's going to be a lot of recessions, and then the business cycle is going to be going through these different stages, overall the value of your investment of your stock is going to increase. Okay, that's a little detour. What is happening to the business uh, uh, during economic growth? economic growth is going to be described as the increase in the level of a country's domestic product. So we have economic growth happening like in the long term here, but also here is economic growth, here is economic decline, here is economic growth again, economic decline. But in general, what is happening during economic growth? How is it going to affect our business? Okay, if we have a boom, so as the economy is doing well, people are buying and so on. What's happening is that people have a larger access to capital. Yeah, banks are more eager to lend you money because they know that you're going to pay back, or they assume that you're going to pay back because everything's doing so well. So for that reason, because they have larger access, they also tend to spend more. They spend more, they also earn more. So you as a business are going to have larger revenues. Okay. You can increase prices during a boom. Okay. Because people are going to buy your stuff anyway. They feel rich during an economic boom. Businesses are going to invest more, maybe into technology, into their HR, into their workers. There's going to be low unemployment. Businesses are probably going to fight for workers, and for that reason, salaries might also be rising. Okay. Now, what is happening during a recession? Businesses can go bankrupt. Why? Because people don't spend as much as they used to. Okay, so consumption goes down. Suddenly, you will feel you'll feel like you're competing, like really competing for customers with your competition. People are going to be less eager to spend, so they'll save more. There'll be more money on their saving accounts. The businesses, for that reason, because they will not be able to afford employees, so they'll make them redundant. What does that mean? Basically, that means firing, but not firing, because when you fire someone, it's because of the fact that they made a mistake. But when you make people or employees redundant, that just means that you basically just don't have space for them anymore. You would like to keep them if you could, but you cannot afford them. So this is a lot what was happening during COVID. Restaurants were making employees redundant. The tourism was making employees redundant. Employees were basically losing jobs, especially those jobs or those employees which were not core to the business. And overall, people's incomes decreased. So this is something that, like, right now you can also be observing. Do you think we are booming? Our economy is booming right now, or do you think that we might be, reaching a phase where recession is about to begin? So try to maybe talk about that also at home, or with your friends, or with your parents, with your friends, to kind of have an idea of where we're at when it comes to the economy. Now, the second thing that will change economic factors are some changes in the government economic policy. So I was mentioning the government a lot when I was talking about the trade cycle. Now, what we need to understand about the government, this is a little kind of step away from the business into economics, but the idea is that it is very closely going to affect our businesses. Okay, so what are the four main macroeconomic objectives? Economic growth and rising living standards. So this is one thing that the government is definitely going to want to achieve. I want to achieve economic growth so that the people in my country have rising living standards. Okay, so that is one economic objective. Second one, low levels of unemployment. I want all my people in my country to be employed. Now, unemployment we can be defining as the number of people in an economy who are willing, and this is important, who are willing and able to work, but who cannot find employment. So when we're talking about unemployment, we're not talking about people who really don't want to get a job. We're only talking about people who are willing to get a job, but just basically cannot find them. That is why unemployment is so scary. We don't want people who want a job not to be able to get one. Now, as a government, we also want low levels of inflation. What does inflation mean? Inflation is the rate of change in the average level of prices. So if I take all my prices in the market, inflation, it means that the prices are all rising. Okay, this is what we're facing right now. The very high inflation, actually, very high. There are two types of inflation. There can be cost push inflation. This is caused by rising costs, maybe of resources. And these rising costs are forcing businesses to increase prices. Okay, and we also have a demand pull inflation. So this is caused when we have excess demand in the economy. When people want more of your product than you can actually supply. Now, we are facing inflation right now. What do you think is going to be the reason of the inflation? Is it going to be a cost push inflation? Are our prices rising because we have, or because businesses have rising costs? What costs? Of which resource? Think about that. Also, are we facing demand pull inflation? Maybe it maybe a combination? Do we also have excess demand in the economy? Like, are people really, really, buying stuff that they cannot or they don't need, but just because they can, they're buying it? And the demand pull inflation is very typical for an economic boom. So it's where businesses are raising prices just because they can, not because they have to. So now this is also the question of whether now we're facing cost push inflation, cost push inflation or demand pull inflation. To answer that, you really need to also be able to answer the previous question of like where we're right now facing a recession or whether we are in the boom phase. Okay, apart from inflation, we also have balance of payments equilibrium. Now, what does that mean? Basically, every government wants the value of imports to equal the value of exports over time. We want to be sufficient, okay? So we don't want our imports to actually be higher than what we are producing in our country and that what we are perhaps exporting to other countries. So this is why the balance is there. Also, we don't want our exports to be higher, because what would that mean? That we are basically exporting all of our like natural resources, all of our skills abroad, and we maybe cannot or don't want to afford imports from abroad. So basically, the balance of payments need to be in equilibrium. Okay, imports need to equal exports over time. These are the four main economic objectives. And what we need to know about these four main economic objectives is that the government is going to be doing different, let's say, policies in order to achieve these economic objectives. For example, if there is very high inflation, it might be, doing like invest less in the economy to somehow limit, sort of slow down the economy. On the other hand, if there is going to be a recession, it might try to like lower interest rates. It might try to, let's say, give incentives to businesses for investment, for spending money. So economic policies are going to affect businesses because then businesses are going to have to somehow be working around the economic policies. And that is why you need to know these different terms. Now, jumping on to the next factor, which is the environmental factor. These are going to be all the factors that influence or are determined by the surrounding physical environment. What does that mean? Physical environment. Does that mean weather? Does it mean climate? Does it mean the land that we're basically like building our factories on? It is going to mean all these things that I mentioned, because they're surrounding us and they're going to affect um, our businesses. The physical environment is going to be more crucial for certain industries than others. So it is going to be crucial for tourism. Okay. Um, Look at one of the environmental factors, which was an pandemic, COVID. How has it affected tourism? Horribly, like enormously, right? Farming is going to be affected. Agriculture is, well, farming and agriculture is the same thing, but those are going to be affected by what? By the climate change, right? By erosion, by the fact that maybe your land is losing a lot of important nutrients. Also, we will have mineral extraction that is going to be affected as well. So certain industries are going to be more affected by environmental factors. On the other hand, if we look at the environment as a whole, uh, all of the businesses are going to be affected eventually if the world doesn't do anything about climate change, right? So the most important environmental influences can be for businesses that are just like regular businesses. It can be different environmental controls. So something that is like good for the society, good for all of us, but maybe not so beneficial, maybe not so profitable for businesses, is the fact that governments are putting some specific environmental controls on different activities. They might be affecting the way how businesses dispose of their waste. They might be controlling the way how businesses use sustainable energy. They might be affecting or trying to impose some rule that is going to reduce the packaging used by businesses. I mean, overall, that's very great for us, but for the business whose main role is to earn profit, especially a business that is very much focused on short-term profit rather than long-term profit, well, these controls are going to affect them negatively. Okay. Then the threats from natural events such as drought, earthquakes, floods. Okay, these can affect any business that is, for example, near a river, or in case of the flood, or experiencing drought. That can happen anywhere. Natural resources. Well, natural resources, I mean, all of the businesses are using some natural resource to create they're good. Uh, I cannot think of anything right now. But let's say if I need paper, to make a book or to print a book, and I'm running out of wood, well, that's going to affect my business quite a lot. Yeah. Yeah, so in Czech Republic, the wood industry, what has it been affected by? This one really annoying bug, who is basically the reason for a lot of our forests being cut down. Yeah, so again, another environmental influence. And the last one that I have listed here is the infrastructure. So, um, you cannot build a road through a forest. So the environment is probably going to be, affecting also my infrastructure. And obviously, we know infrastructure is super important for businesses because that's how we get our products from the factory to a customer and so on. All right, then the next factor is going to be political factors. Now, political influences, there can be a lot. We said we kind of brainstormed some of them during our lesson. It was government stability, form of political structure, so whether it's democracy or not, the government's attitude to private ownership, and the trade policies, or maybe some the membership of free trade areas or customs unions. So, for example, for us, the fact that we're part of EU. Now, how is it going to affect businesses? If the government is stable, then we might be planning for the future much better than if our government is changing from every 4 years. Form of political structure, well, it's going to be very different if we're operating in an autocratic dictatorship, where you have concerns over human rights, or if you're going to be operating in a democratic country. Okay, so here's some examples that you can read. Government's attitude to private ownership. Well, if the government is committed to nationalization of private businesses and high taxes on private wealth, then obviously this will discourage anybody who wants to run a business privately. Maybe they'll set up their private business in a different country, rather than the one that wants to nationalize private businesses. And then the trade policies, how do they affect us? If we're going to have restrictions on free trade, maybe we'll have some tariffs or quotas. By the way, if you don't know what these are, try to research. They're connected to economics as well. So if the government is going to have restricted free trade, this will discourage us from investing in the business. Okay, if we are going to have also, maybe why is it going to discourage us from investing in the business if I have a restricted free trade? Because maybe if I wanted to expand and export to other countries, it wouldn't be beneficial for me because I would have those tariffs and quotas. And this would basically discourage my business from growth. So last lesson we were talking, or the last unit that we were talking about was growth. How businesses want to grow, become maybe international, so that they can benefit from economies of scale much more. In this case, if we have a restricted free trade, then they cannot benefit from the growth as much, because exporting from your own country would be much more expensive because of these tariffs. All right, so this was political. Now legal. Bear with me, guys. We're getting there. We're getting to the end. Legal. Most legal constraints would fall under the following main categories. So we would have different employment laws affecting your business, consumer protection laws, business competition laws, political changes resulting from a new government. So maybe some laws that are going to be telling us that we can or cannot privatize state-owned businesses, or the other way around, that we can or cannot nationalize private businesses. These changes from a new government can affect the policies towards foreign direct investment, and whether they allow multinational companies to invest in our country or not. Now, the employment laws, consumer protection laws, business competition laws, basically, if I were to somehow sum up every single law that is protecting one of our stakeholders, so whether it is an employee, whether it is a consumer, whether it is our competitor, it exists to benefit that specific stakeholder, but logically it is going to somehow make the business's life harder. Why? Because they will not have as much freedom. They cannot be hiring and firing employees whenever they want. They cannot be cheating the consumer. And here it's not the idea of like whether it's beneficial for the business. Obviously it might be even more beneficial for the business to actually stick to these laws, because they are positively affecting your business profit in the long term. However, a lot of shareholders might feel like that's a constraint. So if you're ever going to be answering a question, maybe write an essay about whether the legal factors are opportunities or threats. This might be an interesting take on this whole topic. The idea is that, oh, we jumped to another topic. Now, the factor, the ethical factor, is the last external environment factor. And now, what is ethics? We shortly talked about it when we were discussing the different concepts that business management is using, and whether we are talking about quite often. Um, Ethics can be defined as the values and attitudes that lead, individuals and also organizations or businesses um, in a specific way. Um, you might have different differences across countries when it comes to these values and attitudes, and that's why it's also important for us to be analyzing the ethical factor in our steeple analysis. So in this case, like the steeple analysis would be used, for example, to see whether we should um, start a business in our own country or perhaps in a different country, maybe based also on these ethical factors. So the countries are going to approach the following issues differently: child labor, corruption in business practices, advertising, and promotion to children, and even more ethical dilemmas. Um, the idea is that if you know the ethical feeling of the country is, let's say, more strict, then it can be, as again, similar to the laws, can be considered a threat for the business, but also an opportunity. If I'm an ethical business, then I'll probably thrive more in an ethical country, right? And maybe the other way around. So it's it really much depends also on the company. If the company has a very strict ethical code, uh, and is being consistent in using the ethical code in all of the markets, then then good for the company. You can be operating almost anywhere, but a lot of the times companies don't have a very strong ethical code, and the ethical approach can be differing from culture to culture, or also from market to market, depending on where they're located at. Obviously, if they don't follow this strict ethical code, this can very much damage their reputation. So again, something that they need to consider. All right, so this is pretty much it when it comes to the steeple analysis. I'm going to want you to read the chapter on steeple analysis in your book, because there are a lot of other examples. Maybe certain factors are going to be talked in more detail. Um, or also differently than how I've explained it. So I would like you to please read that specific chapter in the book so that we can talk about the next lesson and also do a short exercise. All right, guys, have a nice weekend. Bye bye.